I have the pleasure today of introducing Rob Cooley. Rob is the CTO at OptiMine, a local company based here in Minneapolis. I'm excited that Rob is going to join us today. I tried recruiting him for our last conference, but I wasn't early enough in getting a slot on his schedule, so it's exciting that he'll be here today. Rob has deep expertise and broad application experience with data mining and optimization technologies. He's known for his groundbreaking work in web mining and has over 15 years of experience managing projects and analyzing data in a variety of fields with a focus on e-commerce, CRM, and unstructured text. In addition to a PhD in computer science from the University of Minnesota, he holds degrees in civil and nuclear engineering. And the fun fact about Rob today is that he's completed an Ironman triathlon. So let's welcome Rob.
All right. Thanks, Lizzie. All right, so actually I'm now up to 20 years ago, I actually started analyzing web traffic. And actually at the time it wasn't marketing analytics because we hadn't figured out how we were going to make money off of the web yet. Right? It was just web analytics, and then at some point the marketing part came along to figure out how to pay for the web. About in the mid-2000s, one of the things I started to get very frustrated that I kept on seeing the same problems repeat themselves with web analytics, right? And it got frustrating enough for me that I actually was dumb enough to start my own company, which is sort of where OptiMine came from. So OptiMine is now an 8-year-old company, but I started it because I wanted to try to do what I consider marketing analytics, digital marketing analytics, the right way. And it's been a fairly successful run. We work with some fairly large advertisers, helping them figure out their basically what their marketing analytics and digital analytics or marketing efforts are worth. Just if you haven't heard of OptiMine, our place in the universe, at least according to the latest MQ from Gartner, is we're fast, we're flexible, and our customers like us. And it's actually coming from the last keynote, we're agile marketing. So we actually provide software that helps marketers execute an agile marketing plan. So that's my background and sort of what I'm doing these days with respect to this. But if you look at digital marketing analytics, the dominant paradigm that is what I call path analysis or tracking, right? Typically it's called multi-touch attribution. So just out of curiosity, how many people in the room are actively involved or have been involved in attribution projects? All right, so about half, all right? The basic idea is this notion that we're going to follow people around the web, all right? And then, so therefore, when something of interest happens, like a purchase or a download, I can then go look back at the path and go, aha, this person got to me through this, these following 3 or 4 clicks, and therefore I can do some cool analytics and figure out what worked and what didn't work, right? So that's the basic idea, right? It actually works really well for certain context, and the key to where it works well is the word customer, right? When we use tracking to enhance the customer experience, personalization, or any of the classic CRM tasks, I'm trying to do personalization, churn, try to get people to spend more, like incremental spend with my customer base. It's enormously successful, right? And the reason I put those 3 logos on the screen is these 3 companies have made billions of dollars. Top line, as someone pointed out last night, Amazon doesn't make profit, but they certainly make billions of dollars on top line revenue, exploiting this notion of tracking people and then taking that information and analyzing it and using it to improve things, right? Right. So there's no question that the tracking paradigm works well when you're dealing with customers, right? And by customer, in this case, I mean people who choose to interact with your brand or business. Right? Even Google, even though you're not paying to use the search, we're all choosing to interact with Google, right? We choose to go there and use their search features, and a lot of us use their Gmail and all their other features, and in return for that, Google gets to know a lot about what we do, and then they turn that around and use it to provide better targeted advertising, right? So that's all cool. I have no problem with that, right? But then we get to this other use of that tracking information, which is basically, what did I get in return for putting this ad? What is the value of an ad? All right. And this is the part where I have heartache, and this is why I at least called in it my little blurb. This is going to be a little bit of a rant, because I'm now at 20 years of beating my head against the same wall here, which is, it sounds so nice on the surface, right? It's a nice, clear, it's a very seductive. Soren Reichard, who was a co-speaker with me at an SMX event, basically called this crack for marketers, right? It's this notion, I'm just going to follow everyone around, right? Because everyone loves being followed, right? By companies that you haven't chosen to do business with yet, right? Then I can basically map this to a direct marketing paradigm, right? I like direct. I was at Fingerhut. We did catalogs. This is cool. I know what I'm doing there, right? Where I can have the seen and the not seen groups, right? My treatment and my control, the people that saw the ad and the people that didn't see the ad. And once I can do that, then life's easy, right? I can just go ahead and measure incremental value, right? In this case at the bottom, hey, the paths that saw the ad, they've got a 2.5% higher response rate than the paths that haven't seen the ad, right? This is good, right? So conceptually, it makes a lot of sense, which is why we all bid on the pitch. I mean, for me, it was actually 1996 is when I started trying to work on this path analysis, actually for my PhD thesis. But then we run across reality, right? And reality has been a consistent nightmare for 20 years now. And it's getting worse, not better, right? Because at least in the 90s, we didn't have multiple devices. We didn't have smartphones. We typically all owned a computer, if that, right? So. And these are my top 5. It's actually, I had to cut the talk down. I could add another 15 or 20 reasons why this is a nightmare, but this is sort of top 5, which is the first one is you don't have a ad, as we were just hearing. Digital allows you to do thousands of things or millions. We actually had a customer for OptiMine. If you think of every keyword as an ad, they had 1 billion keywords. Right? It was travel. They were doing multiple countries, and when they divided all the different combinations out, that means they had 1 billion ads in the field. Think about that. Right? So now let's think about paths. Right? Okay, if I'm going to do analysis, we're into analytics here. Well, paths can't be unique in order to analyze it. I've got to have some overlapping paths if I actually want to do something with them. Right? Well, now, if I just have 1,000 ads and I've got a path link of 5, well, that's a quadrillion combinations, right? 15 zeros. Right? What's the probability that in any given month you're actually going to have a decent set of overlapping paths where you can start to get an analysis? Right? From practical experience, I know the answer is 0. You're not. So the first thing you find if you do this is you immediately have to throw out path order. So you go from combinations to permutations, right? You scale it down by just saying, okay, I'm just going to go with frequent item sets. Right? The next thing you run across is, I still don't have enough data to really get anything going. So now I'm going to, instead of treating each keyword separately, I'm just going to lump it all up into paid search, right? Display, social. Right? So now I can finally get to the point where I'm running analysis, which is really frustrating because you've now sort of all the cool things that led you to this notion of multi-touch analysis. I'm going to have all this great granular detailed data. The first thing you realize as an analyst is you have to throw out all that detail if you ever want to have a hope of giving a model. Right? So that's sort of issue number 1. Issue number 2 is we've got data tracking problems galore. Right? The notion that you can reliably follow the non-customers, people who haven't chosen to interact with your brand around the web and across their devices is just, it does not hold up. It doesn't even pass the sniff test. I mean, how many people in here own a mobile phone? I'm assuming everybody. How many people have viewed ads on their mobile phone? Right? A lot. How many people actually buy things on their mobile phone? Right? You buy some, but how many people prefer to buy stuff on like a laptop where you've actually got a full-size keyboard? Right? That breaks the tracking paradigm. Right? So that is a major, major issue. Right? And I'm going to talk more about that. So I've got a whole slide on this issue. Next up is it's a very click-centric paradigm. Right? Clicks have value. Right? And actually, I was talking to it was an agency, and because I was like, well, what about impressions? And the guy looked at me and said, everyone knows that digital impressions have no value. I went, that's an interesting statement. So you're basically saying any ad that you can't click on has no value. TV, radio, print, which sort of brings me to my, my next point is offline still exists, right? It's still out there. TV is actually still the big dog in terms of budgets, right? So what this guy was telling me, and he was in his 20s, so apparently he was born after the advent of TV, but when TV was big, was he basically refused to acknowledge that like a display ad or a social ad impression had any value. He said the only way you ever get value from ads is if somebody clicks on it. I was like, okay, that just sort of flies in the face of all of the marketing work we've done pre-digital. So the offline still exists is another issue that you run into, right? And it's not just on the ad side, right? Offline exists on the value side of the equation too, right? If we're trying to model towards value, right? What if you have retail stores? What if you have a call center? We actually work with a lot of like insurance companies, right? Their value comes through agents, right? Most people, when they want to sign up for a new policy, actually call their agent and then go sit down in front of them physically. And so large insurance companies tend to 90% of their value is coming through a person, right? Anyone care to guess how much how good the tracking is from the digital ad to the Allstate agent? Right? Yeah. So offline's an issue, and then the final sort of on my top 5 thing that makes this a nightmare, if you try to use path analysis to determine the value of an ad, is digital ads are not discrete events. These are not mail drops, right? They exist over time, right? If I put a display ad in the field, it's going to typically, especially if I think it's a good one, I'm going to let it ride for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, right? Same thing with search, keywords, social, a little shorter, right? I guess a post is sort of like a discrete event, but a lot of these events exist over time, or these ads exist over time, which means when you try to map it into a direct marketing paradigm, you've got a fundamental disconnect, right? Direct marketing, and our analytic techniques, propensity to respond models, which I'm assuming that as an audience we're all familiar with, right? Tend to sort of assume you've got a thing, right? A catalog, a mail drop, an email blast, right? That you can then measure a response rate from. And now we're trying to use that kind of analysis tools for stuff that just fundamentally doesn't fit. Right? These things exist over time, and that creates all sorts of issues. Right? So there's my top 5. We're going to drill into, now we're going to drill into incremental lift, which is sort of related to the first one there. And here's my obligatory Dilbert cartoon, which you're required to have if you're going to give an analytic talk. Right? It's not exactly incremental lift, but it's the closest I could find. Right? So. All right. So reality is, while we're an audience that are sophisticated analysts and we understand the problem of incremental value, 99 times out of 100, people are taking their digital attribution data and they're not considering incrementality. But usually why it's too hard, right? It's too complicated, right? And when you take multi-touch attribution and you ignore incremental value, you get a really bad answer, right? And I've probably had my hands on, when I started OptiMine, I counted, I'd had my hands on over 300 companies worth of data. So now it's 8 years later, it's probably something north of 500. So I've had my hands on a lot of data from a lot of companies looking at this, and I'd say, I think, I can count on one hand the number of times I've actually talked to a company that was doing incremental modeling the right way off of their digital data. The other 495 are doing it this way. Right? And so what I have here is a really simple example, right? So we've got scenario A with just 2 paths, and this is assuming perfect tracking. So this is the case where nobody owns mobile phones and we can track everybody reliably 100% all the time, right? But we've got people who just go into paid search and buy stuff, and then we have people that see a display ad and then go to paid search and buy stuff. Right? Right? And we're basically at if they see a display ad in the first scenario, we've got 50 more conversions, so that's a incremental value of 50 orders. And then scenario B is exactly the same with the exception of I've got no lift. Right? Adding in the second display ad didn't do anything for my conversion rate. Right? So it's the old like remarketing. I'm going to put it right in front of you right before you buy. Well, it doesn't actually provide more orders, right? So we look at so I'm using sum of squared errors here at the bottom. So SSE, pick your metric of choice, but I'll go with SSE, right? So the truth here has a SSE of 0, right? No error. I got it right. 50 and 0. Now let's look at some of the popular attribution techniques, right? Last click, okay, everyone says that's bad, and it's got a SSE of 2,500. We can go to first click, and it is better, right? We can now, go 25 and 25, but it's still got a fairly high SSE. But then what really gets me is then people say, yeah, but I'm better than first or last click. I'm using fractional click because it's got to be better because it's more complicated. And here, fractional click, if you're not familiar with this, you basically divide the value amongst the clicks that occurred in the path. Right? So in this case, we've only got 25 clicks on either side, so all we can do is divide that. So if 25 clicks lead to 25 orders, then half of the value goes to the first click and half of the value goes to the last click, right? So that's 12.5 each. That actually has an SSE that's worse than first click. It's actually, it's okay, it's a little better than last click, but not really that much better. So the statement that I hear all the time, it's, but fractional attribution is better than nothing. No, it isn't. It's, and this is just a super simple example. The probability that your error rate is any better if you arbitrarily assign value without considering incrementality is, in my experience, 0. Right? So, and I know I'm already running short on time here, so we're going to touch one more point and then sort of cut to the chase here. The data errors I talked about are also, going to cause you problems because that first example, we're assuming clean data. And of course, the reality here is you have an incredibly corrupt data set. And usually when I push people on this, I say, yeah, we know those errors, but I'm sure it doesn't affect my results. Yes, it does. And basically the problem is because you basically, there's my obligatory Venn diagram. Every analytic presentation also needs a Venn diagram. And it's your treatment and your control groups are overlapping, right? Because I've got 2 IDs for you, one on your mobile device and one on your laptop. So I think you're separate people, but you're not. And you're purchasing in the device where I didn't think you saw the ad, because you saw the ad on your mobile device, right? So you get you get hit twice on the error rate, right? Because it drives down the measured lift on the mobile and it drives up the conversion rate on the laptop. You can actually get negative lift, right? So here, 100% meaning I've got perfect tracking. If you get more than 50% of your population using mobile devices, you can get a result that says your ad caused people to not buy, right? And it's rare in my experience. I mean, yeah, you see some really bad ads, but to actually drive people to not purchase because they hated your ad so much is actually pretty rare. So those are just 2 of the reasons why I just really, really hate the tracking paradigm for trying to figure out the value of the ad. The next question, probably the last I'll have time to address here, is, well, how did we get to this point? Because it made a lot of sense in what I call the second era of digital marketing, right? It's, first we had what I call the pets.com era of digital marketing, right? We just sort of did eyeballs without worrying about value. And that was a bust and led to the .com crash, right? And then second era is the rise of Google, right? Very click-centric, right? Very search-centric. It's an intentional channel. I go in and say, Nike shoes or Nike size 10 men's shoes, right? And if you think about it, the Google search does sort of map to the direct marketing paradigm because you've got somebody that's searching and there's a lot of clicks to value. So digital attribution basically got its start in the second era of digital advertising. Right? So at least you can sort of see why everyone jumped on that bandwagon, because again, really nice, clean, seductive paradigm, and it sort of fits what we were doing in the early 2000s. But now we're in what I call the third era, right? Mobile social, right? And the rise of mobile social has really, this is a good thing, right? Because now we've got, talk about necessary complexity, where we got all sorts of things going on, but search is no longer the owner. Right? In fact, a lot of money is going into things. We've got Facebook and Pinterest and Snapchat and Twitter and all these things that actually act far more like brand advertising opportunities than they do like direct marketing. Right? Brand awareness, brand recognition, brand favorability. And which is why you see the digital marketing spend is actually growing to the point where it's projected to pass TV for the first time either next year or the year after that, right? So there's a, right, and the more you move up funnel, the probability that you're going to successfully track somebody who saw your ad in January to their purchase in March is even smaller. It wasn't good to begin with, and now you're toast, right? So but you can sort of see, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where you've got an odometry and a convertro and a visual IQ all out there telling you that you can figure out the value of your ad if you just track everybody, all the time? It's because it made sense in the 2004, 2005 time period, or at least made sense on the surface. As it actually turned out there were problems even then, but you can sort of forgive everyone from going down the road. Whereas now in today's era, it's a non-starter. Right? So are we just toast? Is it hopeless for marketing, figuring out the value of the ads? No, it's just you got to pick the right tools. Right? For me, it's about taking a step back and saying, well, what do we really have here? Oh, we've got ads that exist over time. We've got a lot of brand going on. Gee, if I go back and look at my my TV radio days, like Nielsen ratings and that kind of stuff, there are a whole bunch of techniques that tend to work well for this kind of environment. Right? I'm not saying they're all it's big panacea and life is rosy, but. And this is just one technique. So econometric time series. It's not the only technique, but it's a good one. It's been around for a long time, right? There's entire academic departments that will teach you about econometric. So how many people have used time series or econometric time series in their field? Yeah. So there's a good third of the audience, right? This is not, this isn't some newfangled thing that just popped out. It's actually a really solid technique that works well for the environment we actually have, right? And for those of you who aren't familiar with this, which is a decent point, it's the example I use, and this is even if you are familiar, this is a really good example to use when you're talking to people who don't know what a time series means. Is the example I call it the billboard example. Imagine you have one physical store, you're making 100 grand a week, and you put up your first ad on the highway, the billboard, and you start making 110 grand a week. What's the value of the billboard? It's probably worth about 10 grand. And if you're a skeptic, you could take it down. And if the 10 grand a week disappears, now you're more confident that the value of the billboard is $10,000 a week. Any idea who drove past the billboard? Do you care who drove past the billboard? Right? Well, if you want to do targeting and personalization, yes, but if you want to know the value of the billboard, no. You do not need to know who saw the ad in order to figure out the value, right? Because you can do your time series, right? 100 grand, 110 grand, 100 grand, right? It popped up when I put the billboard up on the highway. Take that concept and extend it to, and obviously it's more complex when you've got a billion ads in the field and all sorts of things going on, seasonality and everything, but ultimately it comes back to that concept, right? And the nice thing about it, at least, is it's a concept that fits the nature of the advertising, right? These are ongoing events, they're not discrete events, right? So I've made a whole successful business out of using econometric time series because it gets around all these nasty, thorny issues, that when you try to apply path analysis to digital marketing analytics. I don't think I'm down to 2 minutes, so we're going to wrap up. I had a really cool example with lots of neat curves. Just to show you that it really does work. That was actually, so if you get the deck, that's actually a real ad with real data of how a time series works. So wrap it up. It's I'm not beating on multi-touch attribution for customer, CRM type of things. It's a great idea for that. But as soon as you try to extend it into figuring out the value of your ads, as in what's going on with your prospects, it's been a bust. And I've got 20 years and 500 companies, I've got a lot of data to support that it doesn't really work well. And especially now that we're in the third era of digital marketing. So, last point is, we're smart. We know what we're doing. Just pick out the right tools out of your toolbox when you tackle these problems. Don't try to use a direct marketing, propensity to respond model to solve an ongoing time series. With that, I think I probably killed my time for questions. Or, oh, I left 5 minutes for QA. Excellent. Everyone's stunned. That was the fire hose.
Yeah, How do you help customers who are starting to move their customer service, product delivery, and their relationships into a digital form and starting to measure and monitor what the uplift is from a marketing and revenue perspective?
So how do I personally deal with it? Well, in this case, since I started a software company that provides software, it's an easy answer for me. I say, hey, use my software. Somewhat self-serving, but it's not an accident that OptiMine uses econometric time series. I said I started the company specifically because I felt that that was a better approach, right? So in this case, I'm sort of lucky. My main tool is the thing that I believe is the best way to solve the problem. So I don't get any sort of moral conflicts there. And since I'm the CTO, I get to guide the development of the software. So it always represents my latest and greatest thinking of what is the right way to solve the problem. I realize it might be a satisfactory answer for people who don't own their own software company, but it works well for me. So for the advertisers, the most important thing is actually some of these concepts, right? The first thing we do is it's where we run into trouble, or where I run into trouble, is if they're convinced that the only way you can do digital is by tracking people, then that in my experience is a problem. And in some cases it's religion, right? And I have to just sort of carefully and slowly back away from, right? Especially when I run across customers where even though they sort of know it was a bust, they spent $250,000 in 2 years implementing it, and the political fallout, if they went to their boss and said, yeah, all that money and time we spent, it's not actually going to solve the problems that we said it was going to solve. More often than not, we run into political issues where they're just not ready to admit that that was a big waste of time and money, right? But when, usually we're talking to people who have sort of already figured that out, and then it's explaining I use that billboard example a lot, and usually what happens is people go, oh, it's not more complicated, right? Time series isn't any more complex a concept than path analysis. It's because the billboard example is really simple, and that's how we tend to walk people through you don't have to track. As soon as you get over that hurdle, then life's fairly smooth, and actually the data is easier to get your hands on. As soon as you take customers out of it, guess what? You don't need PII. Ooh, that's an interesting thing, right? You just need data rolled up by day. It's actually so much smaller data sets, also a nice side advantage of running a time series. Right? You don't need line item detail. You want how many orders you got per day, or revenue per day, or whatever. Right? Yep.
But then for new products, how do you do time series if you have no history?
That's back to it's not a panacea. Yeah. It doesn't, right? Time series does not solve all problems if you're trying to launch a new product and you have no history. But that's as true for direct mail. It's if I want to send out a marketing piece that's got an offer that I've never tested before, what do I do first? I send out a test mail. Same thing with new products, right? You got to get some test data in order to feed the model. So I don't think that's any different, right? Every modeling technique needs some data. So same principle applies. It doesn't magically get rid of the need for testing. Other questions? No? I guess we're good. Thank you.